The girl in the red dress. Elon Musk was just another billionaire, cruising through Austin, Texas, in his custom-built Tesla Cybertruck, when he encountered something that would forever alter the course of his day. The angular design of his vehicle, with its shiny metallic exterior, was a stark contrast to the ordinary sedans, trucks, and SUVs around it. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, Elon navigated through the bustling streets, his mind fully engaged in a video conference about the upcoming Cybertruck prototype. "Elon, can you hear me? The battery range for the new model is crucial. Can we squeeze out any more efficiency?" A woman's voice crackled through the speakers, snapping Elon's focus back to the task at hand. "Yes, absolutely," Elon replied, his voice clear and confident. "We've managed to increase the range by 50 miles with a few key changes to the battery design. We're pushing the limits with every iteration." The conversation continued, moving from design changes to logistical challenges, but Elon's mind had begun to wander. The streets of Austin were an endless parade of people, traffic lights, and skyscrapers. But as his Cybertruck came to a stop at a red light, something unusual caught his eye. A crowd had gathered at an intersection just ahead. There, standing at the edge of the crosswalk, was a young girl. She couldn't have been more than 12 or 13, but there was something different about her. Dressed in a bright red dress, her appearance seemed to stand in stark contrast to the drabness of the city. In her hands, she clutched a tin can, which she rattled periodically. It was an odd sight. She wasn't just begging, but performing for an audience. The people around her held up their phones, eagerly recording the scene, their faces frozen in expectant silence. Elon leaned forward, intrigued. The crowd wasn't the usual indifferent Austin bystanders, they were invested. A performance? A social experiment? Or perhaps something else entirely? The air felt heavy with expectation, and for a moment, Elon's mind momentarily shifted away from the technicalities of his meeting. "Elon, are you still with us?" The voice from the conference snapped him back to reality. The light had turned green, and the cars behind him were honking. "Apologies," Elon said smoothly, pressing the accelerator to ease the Cybertruck forward. "I'm here. Let's continue." But even as the conversation about production schedules and marketing strategies swirled around him, Elon found his thoughts drifting back to the girl. What was going on with her? The crowd, the rattle of her can, the expectancy in the air, it was all so out of place. The meeting dragged on, but Elon's mind kept circling back to the mysterious scene he had witnessed. As soon as the conference ended, he knew he had to go back. His curiosity, a trait that had fueled so much of his career, was now piqued. What was this girl's story? Why had she drawn such a crowd? He couldn't let it go, not now, not when the mystery still loomed. "Great work, everyone," Elon said as the meeting concluded, his voice professional but distracted. "I'll be in touch about the next steps. For now, I have a small errand to run." Without waiting for further comments, Elon ended the call. He looked around the interior of his Cybertruck, adjusting his seat, and then turned the vehicle around. He needed answers. As he drove back toward the intersection where the girl had stood, the streets of Austin unfolded around him. The Cybertruck's engine hummed quietly, a serene companion as his mind raced. What was he about to uncover? The possibility of solving a puzzle, even in a small corner of the world, had ignited something deep within him. The routine of his day, the meetings, the deadlines, the constant flow of data, was suddenly far less important than this fleeting, unresolved scene on the street. He turned into the intersection where the crowd had gathered earlier. The streets were quieter now, the crowd long gone. The light had turned green as he approached, but Elon didn't move forward immediately. He wanted to see if the girl in the red dress was still there. To his surprise, she was. Now that the crowd had dispersed, Elon could see her more clearly. The girl was standing alone at the crosswalk, still holding the same tin can. But the striking brightness of her red dress was contrasted by its obvious wear. Small rips along the hem, faded patches of color, and a general dirtiness told a story of a life not spent on the streets of the privileged part of Austin. Yet her presence in the middle of this bustling intersection, her striking performance earlier, seemed so out of place. Her tin can, which had seemed to carry nothing but coins and crumpled bills earlier, now seemed almost full. Yet the girl's appearance had only grown more ragged, more disheveled. Elon's thoughts raced, and he realized that something didn't add up. Why had the crowd been so captivated by her? The performance, while compelling in its own right, seemed off. It felt rehearsed, too polished for an impromptu street performance. He couldn't ignore it. Reaching for a pair of sunglasses and a baseball cap from the glove compartment, Elon made a split-second decision. He needed to approach this without anyone recognizing him. The last thing he wanted was to become the center of attention. He was a billionaire, but right now, he wasn't here as the CEO of Tesla, he was here to understand something he couldn't quite make sense of. Elon stepped out of the Cybertruck, his feet meeting the hot pavement. The heat of the day slammed into him, a stark contrast to the cool, climate-controlled environment of his vehicle. He approached the girl cautiously, trying not to make any sudden movements. She looked up at him briefly, her expression unreadable. The wariness in her eyes told him that she had seen more than her share of strangers. "Hey," Elon said, trying to keep his tone casual. "You okay?" For a moment, the girl didn't respond, instead glancing around. There was something guarded in her expression. But she didn't shy away from him either. She had probably been approached countless times before. After a beat, she spoke, her voice low and hesitant. "I'm fine," she said, though her eyes betrayed a hint of uncertainty. She gripped her tin can a little tighter. Before Elon could probe further, a woman's voice called out from behind him. "There you are, sweetie, great job today." Elon turned to see a woman hurriedly approaching, a professional-grade camera hanging from her neck. She was smiling, but there was a nervousness in her eyes. The woman's face was vaguely familiar, but Elon couldn't place her. She quickly turned her attention to him, flashing a polite, rehearsed smile. "I'm sorry if my daughter bothered you," she said. "She's just doing a school project, you see. It's a social experiment about how people react to child beggars. We're filming it for her class." Elon listened carefully, his skepticism growing with every word the woman said. Her explanation was smooth, perhaps too smooth. Something about the whole thing didn't feel right. "A school project?" Elon asked, his voice neutral, though a sharp edge of suspicion crept in. "Seems like a rather elaborate setup for homework." "Oh, yes, her teacher believes in hands-on learning," the woman replied with a bright, almost rehearsed smile. "It's all for educational purposes, you know. We'll donate all the funds to charity." Elon raised an eyebrow. "Which charity, exactly?" The woman hesitated for a moment, her smile faltering just slightly before she returned to her enthusiastic tone. "Various local charities," she said quickly. "But we haven't finalized the list yet. Anyway, we really must be going. We've got to get home and edit the footage. The project's due tomorrow after all." With that, she grabbed the girl's hand, and without another word, they began walking away. The girl didn't speak, her head down, her expression unreadable. Elon watched them leave, slipping his sunglasses back on, trying to avoid recognition as he slid back into the driver's seat. But something about this encounter nagged at him. The story the woman had told seemed rehearsed, too smooth, and the disparity between the girl's appearance and the woman's polished explanation didn't add up. Elon made a quick decision. This wasn't over. The mystery of the girl in the red dress had just begun, and he wouldn't let it go. Not now. With a determined set to his jaw, Elon started the engine of the Cybertruck. Unraveling the mystery. Elon Musk sat in the driver's seat of his Cybertruck, the powerful hum of the electric engine vibrating through the cabin as he drove away from the intersection. The afternoon sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the streets of Austin. Despite the comfort and quiet of the vehicle, his mind was anything but at ease. The encounter with the girl in the red dress, and the woman who claimed to be her mother, had left him unsettled. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. As the Cybertruck navigated the busy streets of Austin, the usual bustle of the city seemed muted, as if the world had slowed down just for him. He had been in plenty of strange situations in his life, but this one felt different. It wasn't just about the girl's odd behavior, it was the entire setup, the professionalism of the woman, the way she had explained the school project, the sudden disintegration of the crowd, and the girl's silence. Everything about it felt like a carefully crafted story designed to hide something deeper. Elon Musk wasn't the type to ignore his instincts, and his instincts were telling him that this wasn't just a social experiment. There was more to it than that. He glanced at the rearview mirror and saw only the empty streets behind him. For a brief moment, he considered just letting it go. After all, he had pressing matters waiting at the Tesla factory. His team was eager to get his input on the new Cybertruck designs. But as he turned the wheel and steered the Cybertruck toward the main highway, his decision was already made. He couldn't walk away from this. The girl in the red dress had haunted him. There was something raw, something desperate in her eyes, something that spoke of hardship far beyond any school project. And then there was the strange coincidence, the same area, the path leading toward the poorer neighborhoods of Austin, the place where Elon rarely ventured. His curiosity had been piqued, but now, it was more than just that. It was a call to action. He needed to understand her story. His mind raced as he drove through the streets of Austin, retracing the route he had taken earlier. His thoughts kept bouncing back to the details, the crowd gathering around the girl, the rattling can, the look on her face when she glanced at him. Was she trapped in some kind of situation? Or was it all a staged act, carefully constructed to manipulate people like him? He had seen the wealth and prosperity of Austin's tech scene, the gleaming buildings, the Silicon Valley-style campuses, the bustling startups, but this part of the city, this other side of the world, was something Elon had never fully understood. As the Cybertruck rolled past the neighborhoods he recognized, he took the next exit, steering the vehicle in the direction he had seen the girl and the woman walking earlier. This was a part of Austin he had never explored before. The streets were narrower, the buildings older and more worn. The further he drove, the more pronounced the contrast became. The shiny, glass-filled city he had built his empire in was nowhere to be seen. Here, there were run-down houses, peeling paint, overgrown lawns, and the unmistakable signs of neglect. As he turned onto the street he had seen the girl walk down, a sense of unease began to settle in his stomach. The Cybertruck was, of course, unmistakable. Its distinctive shape, angular, bold, and futuristic, was bound to draw attention. The very last thing Elon wanted was to draw attention in this part of town, but his curiosity had already gotten the better of him. He slowed the vehicle down, driving cautiously through the quiet streets. Through the window, he could see children playing in the streets, their laughter cutting through the silence like a ray of light in an otherwise grim setting. There were no playgrounds here, no bustling tech offices. Just the stark reality of a neighborhood left behind by the economic prosperity that had come to the city's more affluent parts. Elon drove past abandoned storefronts, some boarded up, others still open but clearly struggling. It was a sharp contrast to the sleek, polished image of Tesla and the cutting-edge tech world that he was so familiar with. He had never seen this side of Austin before. He had built his empire on the cutting edge, the future, the new. But now, this place felt like a reminder that not everyone had access to the opportunities he had helped create. He kept his eyes peeled, scanning the sidewalks for any sign of the girl or the woman. It wasn't long before he spotted them. The woman, who had claimed to be the girl's mother, was walking ahead, her back straight, her pace quick and purposeful. But where was the girl? Elon's gaze darted to the left, and there, standing at the corner of the street, was the familiar red dress. The girl was alone. Elon's heart skipped a beat. He had hoped to find her again, but now that he had, he felt a mix of excitement and anxiety. He pulled over, parking his Cybertruck a little ways down the road. He knew he had to be cautious. This was a poor neighborhood, one where the wrong attention could be dangerous. Yet, the pull to solve this mystery was too strong to ignore. The girl noticed him almost immediately. Her eyes widened as she caught sight of the Cybertruck, and for a moment, she seemed frozen, as if unsure whether to run or to stay. Elon, understanding the instinct to flee, quickly lowered the windows and stepped out of the truck, his face hidden behind sunglasses and a baseball cap. "Hey, I just want to talk," he called out, trying to keep his tone gentle, non-threatening. "I'm not going to hurt you." The girl hesitated, her hands trembling slightly as she held the tin can. There was fear in her eyes, but also something else, something like recognition. She seemed to be sizing him up, deciding whether he was worth trusting. "I won't hurt you," Elon repeated, stepping closer but not too fast. He didn't want to scare her. "I just want to know if you're okay." The girl's eyes flickered nervously, her expression guarded. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why do you care?" Elon paused, surprised by the bluntness of the question. "Because I saw you earlier, and something didn't seem right. I don't think you should be out here like this." The girl shifted on her feet, looking away for a moment. Elon could see the hesitation in her eyes, the reluctance to trust anyone, especially someone like him. He understood it all too well. After all, he was a stranger in her world, a world that had no room for people like him, people from the outside, people who only saw a small fragment of the reality. "I'm just trying to help," Elon added softly. "You don't have to tell me anything you don't want to, but maybe we could sit down, have a talk." She glanced back at the street, a few people walking by, before meeting his gaze again. "I don't know," she said, clearly torn. "Come on," Elon urged gently. "There's a place down the street. You can even order anything you want. Pizza, burgers, whatever." Her eyes softened, and for the briefest of moments, she looked at him as if seeing something beyond his famous name and flashy Cybertruck. Maybe, just maybe, she was starting to believe that he wasn't just another passerby, another rich guy offering empty promises. "All right," she said quietly, stepping away from the corner and walking toward him. She didn't run, though the look of caution never left her eyes. Elon stepped back into the vehicle, and they drove slowly down the street, the heavy atmosphere between them filled with unsaid words, until they reached the small, dimly lit pizza place a few blocks away. The door opened with a soft jingle as they entered, the smell of cheese and tomato sauce wafting through the air. A grumpy old man behind the counter glanced up, his eyes narrowing as he spotted Kelly. "Working again, huh?" he muttered under his breath, his gaze lingering on her as if trying to figure out what was going on. Elon raised an eyebrow, noticing the man's tone. "What's that about?" he asked, his curiosity piqued. The man just snorted, shaking his head. "Nothing," he muttered. "Just go ahead and order." The girl didn't look up as she stepped forward to the counter. She knew the routine, knew how to behave in this place. She had done it all before. Elon watched her closely, but it was clear that there was more to her story than just a girl trying to make ends meet. There were deeper layers here, secrets that she wasn't ready to share yet. But maybe, just maybe, he could help her uncover them. As they sat down at a corner booth, the silence between them thickened, but Elon knew the conversation wasn't over. It was just beginning. Beneath the surface. The pizza place was small, unremarkable, one of those hidden gems you'd only find if you knew exactly where to look. The air inside was thick with the familiar scent of melted cheese, pepperoni, and garlic. A fluorescent light buzzed overhead, casting a cold, clinical glow over the peeling vinyl booths and the cracked tile floor. Elon Musk sat back in one of those booths, the hard plastic pressing into his spine. The girl, Kelly, sat across from him, her red dress now wrinkled and stained from the day's ordeal, but there was something oddly quiet about her now. She hadn't said much since they'd sat down, just quietly ordered a plain slice of pizza and a bottle of water. Elon wasn't in a hurry. He had all the time in the world to figure out what was really going on. The answer he sought didn't seem obvious, but there was something about this place, about Kelly, that made him feel like he was on the verge of discovering a whole other world, one that wasn't filtered through the lens of success or wealth, the glossy veneer of Silicon Valley. This was something raw, something real. Kelly's eyes flickered briefly to Elon before she took a sip of her water, her gaze shifting quickly to the door. There was a slight nervousness in her posture, a guardedness that made it clear she wasn't used to being in places like this, let alone being in the presence of someone like Elon Musk. Elon leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. He didn't speak immediately. He gave her space, letting her take the lead in their conversation. After all, this wasn't his world, he was the outsider here. So, Elon began, his voice calm and casual, "I'd like to hear your side of the story. I don't know if you've had the chance to explain what's really going on, but I'm not here to judge. I just want to understand." Kelly hesitated. She glanced at the slice of pizza on her plate but didn't touch it. Her lips pressed together in a tight line as though she were deciding how much to reveal. After a long pause, she sighed, setting the bottle of water down with a quiet clink. "I don't really know what to tell you," she began, her voice small, a stark contrast to the defiance she'd shown earlier. I do what I'm told. It's all for the money." Elon could sense the weariness in her tone, the weight of someone too young to carry the burdens placed upon her. He nodded slowly, urging her to continue. "Money for school?" he asked gently. She nodded, but her eyes didn't meet his. She stared at the table, her fingers tracing the rim of her water bottle absent-mindedly. "My real mom died a few months ago," Kelly continued, her voice softer now, laced with sorrow. "I was living with my aunt for a while, but she couldn't keep me. She said it was too much for her. So, I ended up on the streets, and then that woman found me." Elon's heart tightened. The girl's story was starting to take shape, but it wasn't one he had expected. "The woman from earlier, the one with the camera?" Elon asked. He tried to keep his voice steady, but his mind was already working through the possibilities. Kelly nodded. "She's not my mom," she said quietly, the words almost like a confession. "Her name is Susan. She just pays me to be in her videos." Elon leaned forward, his gaze fixed on Kelly. "What kind of videos?" She hesitated again, her fingers tapping nervously on the table. "I don't really know. She told me it was for social experiments. She says it's for some kind of project. It's always the same thing. I stand on the street, look sad, rattle a can, and people give me money. Then we take it and go to the next spot. It's all staged. Everything's fake." Elon felt a pang of anger rising in him. He had seen so many people manipulate others for personal gain, but this was different. This wasn't some adult exploiting another adult. This was a child, trapped in a cycle of exploitation. "Why do you do it?" Elon asked, his voice steady but tinged with compassion. "You don't have to." Kelly shifted uncomfortably, her eyes darting around the room. The greasy pizza slice on her plate still remained untouched. "I don't have a choice," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "I need money. I don't want to go back to foster care. I don't want to end up on the streets again. And Susan, she said she could help me. She said I could stay with her. But it's not like she's helping me. She's just using me." Elon could see the tears welling in Kelly's eyes, but she quickly wiped them away with the back of her hand, trying to maintain her composure. "I just wanted to go to school," she continued, her voice cracking. "I want to be a scientist. I want to build things, like you. I want to learn. But I can't do it on my own. I need the money. Elon felt a sharp pang of empathy for her. He had built his own empire on education, on innovation, and now here was a young girl who was so desperate to learn, to escape from the circumstances she found herself in. But the world she was in seemed so far removed from the world he had built, the world where he and others like him had the luxury to dream big and chase innovation without worrying about where the next meal would come from. You don't have to keep doing this, Elon said gently, his voice filled with sincerity. There are other ways to get help. You have more options than you realize. Kelly's eyes flickered with disbelief. I don't know what you mean, she muttered. You have no idea what it's like. People like me don't get second chances. Elon studied her for a moment, seeing the depth of her mistrust, her reluctance to believe that someone, anyone, could help her out of her situation. He couldn't blame her. People had let her down before. Susan had promised her an escape, but instead, she had become just another person to use Kelly for her own benefit. There's always a way out, Elon said, his voice soft but resolute. You just have to believe it. You can't give up on yourself. The words hung in the air, thick with sincerity. Kelly looked up at him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face for any sign of insincerity. But she didn't find any. For the first time since their conversation started, she seemed to soften, her posture relaxing ever so slightly. She looked down at her pizza again, but this time, she picked up a slice and took a small, tentative bite. The silence between them was comfortable now, but the tension in the room was far from gone. They both knew that this wasn't the end of the conversation, it was just the beginning. There were still so many unanswered questions. What about school? Elon asked after a few moments of silence. What's stopping you from going? Kelly lowered the slice of pizza back onto the plate, her fingers gripping the edge of the crust tightly. I don't have money for books or supplies, she said. Even if I go to school, I can't get far without the resources. Elon felt a deep sense of resolve building within him. This girl deserved better, she had potential, and it was clear that the world had failed her. But perhaps he could change that, even in a small way. For the first time since their conversation began, Kelly allowed herself a small, tentative smile. And in that moment, Elon knew he had made the right decision. He was going to make sure this girl, this brilliant, determined young girl, had a future. As they sat in the small pizza place, sharing stories and laughter over a meal, Elon knew that what had begun as an unexpected encounter on the streets of Austin was turning into something far greater. And for Kelly, it was the beginning of a new chapter, one that was full of possibilities. A new path forward. The pizza place was starting to empty out, the last few patrons finishing their meals and making their way toward the door. The soft buzz of a few nearby conversations filled the quiet room, but for the moment, Kelly and Elon sat in their booth, the lingering aroma of cheese and tomato sauce in the air. It was a strange comfort, two people from entirely different worlds, sharing a simple meal, but it felt like the start of something larger. Kelly picked at her pizza, the half-eaten slice now forgotten on the table, while Elon sat back, his fingers tapping lightly on the edge of his water glass. It wasn't a grand revelation, this conversation they were having, but it was a step, an acknowledgement of a hidden world that Elon hadn't truly understood until now. They sat in silence for a few moments, the weight of the world pressing down on Kelly's shoulders. Elon could sense the quiet skepticism in her, the disbelief that someone like him could really offer her a way out. It wasn't just about money, it was about her future, her belief that she had options beyond the cycle of poverty, manipulation, and exploitation. So, what's next? Kelly finally spoke up, breaking the silence. She had pushed her plate aside, but her hands were still clenched tightly in her lap, betraying her unease. Elon looked at her carefully, his expression thoughtful. He had made her a promise, and now he needed to follow through. He had already begun to think about the logistics, about the opportunities that could be available to someone like Kelly. He wasn't sure exactly how to navigate this, but he had the resources to help. More importantly, he had the will to follow through. We start by getting you into a program, Elon said, leaning forward. Something that will get you the basics, education, support, a safe place to stay. It's not going to be easy. But nothing worth doing is. Kelly's brow furrowed slightly. A program? She asked, her voice hesitant. But what about Susan? Elon's face tightened slightly at the mention of the woman who had been using her for these social experiments. He knew Kelly wasn't wrong to ask about her. After all, Susan had given her a place to stay, albeit a deceptive one. But Elon's patience was wearing thin when it came to Susan's manipulations. He wasn't about to let Kelly remain trapped under her thumb any longer. We'll take care of Susan, Elon said firmly, his voice low and steady. You deserve a better life than that. She's using you. And I won't stand for it. Kelly's eyes widened, the faintest flicker of hope creeping into her gaze. She had been living in a world where adults used her for their own purposes, manipulating her actions for their benefit. The idea that someone, Elon Musk, no less, would step in and fight on her behalf was almost too good to believe. But what if she doesn't let me go? Kelly whispered, the words barely escaping her lips. She said I'd be on the streets again if I left her. Elon exhaled slowly, his jaw set in quiet determination. He didn't like thinking about Susan's influence over Kelly, but he knew he couldn't let this continue. We'll work it out. I'll make sure you have the support you need. You're not alone in this. For a moment, Kelly just stared at him, uncertainty still lingering in her eyes. She had been on her own for so long, navigating the streets, looking for any semblance of security. The notion of someone fighting for her future, someone offering a hand up rather than just another charity handout, was foreign to her. But as she looked at Elon, something within her stirred, a flicker of hope that had long been extinguished by years of survival. Thank you, she said, her voice small but sincere. Elon nodded. It's the least I can do. But we're going to need a plan. I'll make some calls, set you up with a mentor, get you into an education program. It won't be easy, but you have a bright future ahead of you if you want it. Kelly sat back, digesting his words. She hadn't had someone in her corner for so long, and now, here was a man who, despite all his wealth and success, was taking time out of his day to invest in her future. It was overwhelming. I'll need your help with one thing, Elon added, his tone shifting slightly. I can't help you unless we get you out of that situation with Susan. We need to make sure you're safe and not being coerced into anything anymore. Kelly's eyes dropped to the table. She wasn't sure how much she wanted to share, or if she could even trust someone like Elon. But there was something about the way he spoke, so earnest, so unyielding, that made her want to believe. She's not just using me for money, Kelly said quietly. She's threatening me. She said I'll end up on the streets again, no matter what happens. That no one else would care about me. That I'd have nowhere to go if I left. Elon's heart clenched. The thought of Kelly, this bright, capable girl, being trapped by fear was unacceptable. She had potential that could change the world, yet here she was, held captive by manipulation and the fear of homelessness. You'll have a place to go, Elon promised. We'll make sure you're safe. I'll take care of everything, Kelly. There was a long pause. Kelly looked up at him, her eyes still filled with doubt, but something in her demeanor had shifted. She wasn't so quick to run away anymore. She wasn't hiding behind the tough exterior that she had worn for so long. For the first time in a while, she allowed herself to believe in the possibility of something better. The next few weeks passed in a blur for Kelly. Elon's promise of support was more than just words. He had called in favors, set up meetings, and ensured that Kelly had access to the resources she needed. He connected her with a local youth shelter that specialized in helping kids who had been exploited, offering her a place to stay while she transitioned out of the chaos of her previous life. More than that, he worked with the shelter to help her enroll in an educational program that would give her the tools to succeed, one where she could finally start learning in a structured, supportive environment. For Kelly, it was nothing short of a miracle. She had never dreamed of having a future outside of survival. Every day had been about getting through to the next, just scraping by. But now, she found herself in an entirely new world, one where someone believed in her potential, where opportunities were no longer out of reach. She still couldn't fully wrap her mind around it. But change was coming. Slowly, steadily, she was beginning to see the possibility of something more. It wasn't just about escaping her past, it was about stepping into a future she had never allowed herself to dream of. She could be a scientist, a creator, a contributor to the world in ways she had never imagined. She just had to take the first step. And the first step had already been taken. As the weeks unfolded, Kelly settled into her new routine, her life beginning to shift in ways that had seemed impossible only a short time ago. But even as she found stability in the shelter and school, she couldn't forget the haunting reality of the woman who had manipulated her for so long, Susan. Elon had promised to take care of that part, and Kelly had no doubt that he would. But the journey wasn't over. Kelly had already taken the first step out of her past. Now, with Elon's help, she was on the path to creating her future. And it was a future that was entirely hers to build. Elon sat in his office later that evening, the glow of his desk lamp illuminating the pages of a report. The day's work was far from over, but his mind kept returning to Kelly. It had been weeks since they first met, and as he reflected on the progress she'd made, a sense of satisfaction began to take hold. For all his accomplishments, his success in space, his breakthroughs in automotive technology, this felt different. This was a real difference in someone's life. A chance for Kelly to live out her potential, to escape the cycle that had held her captive for so long. In that moment, Elon realized that sometimes the most significant changes weren't the ones measured by stock prices or market share, but by the lives touched along the way. And for Kelly, this was just the beginning. The power of a second chance. The days since Kelly's transition into the shelter had felt like a whirlwind of new beginnings, and while she was still finding her footing in this unfamiliar world, the changes in her life had become undeniable. The shelter, which she had once viewed with suspicion, had transformed into her sanctuary, a place where she could start to heal, learn, and, for the first time in a long while, just be a kid. But as her new life began to unfold, her past, one she couldn't escape so easily, loomed over her like a dark cloud. Elon Musk had kept his word, providing not only a safe place for Kelly to stay, but also the resources she needed to pursue an education. He had set her up with a tutor who was helping her catch up on the schooling she had missed, and he had introduced her to a mentorship program that connected young people with professionals who could offer guidance in their careers. The future that had once seemed so distant now felt within reach, but it came with a constant reminder: Susan, the woman who had exploited Kelly, was still out there. It wasn't that Kelly was afraid of her, after all, she had already stood up to Susan in her own quiet way. But the fear of being caught in that toxic cycle again gnawed at her, and there were days when the weight of it seemed too much to carry. Kelly had learned to survive on the streets, but surviving in the world that Elon had opened up for her, one that didn't rely on fear, manipulation, and control, was far more complicated than she had expected. As much as she wanted to focus on the future, the past had a way of catching up with her, especially when it came to Susan. Elon had promised that he would handle it, and Kelly was beginning to trust him in ways she hadn't trusted anyone before, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something still wasn't right. There was a lingering uncertainty that prevented her from fully embracing the freedom she had been given. Elon had always been an innovator, someone who had changed the world with his ideas. But this situation wasn't something that could be fixed with a new technology or a brilliant business strategy. This was personal. And despite all of Elon's wealth and influence, it was clear that Kelly's journey toward healing required more than just resources, it needed a shift in the very way she saw herself. It was a crisp, early morning when Kelly found herself sitting in the back of a small cafe, a cup of hot chocolate warming her hands as she looked out the window. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting soft golden rays across the street. She wasn't quite ready to face the world yet, but the quiet was comforting, giving her time to think. The noise of the city had always been a background hum to her life. But now, as she sat there in the relative peace of the cafe, she was starting to notice the finer details, the way the steam from her hot chocolate curled in the morning light, or the way the cafe owner swept the floor with a quiet, rhythmic motion. It was strange, but she felt at peace in this moment. Kelly had spent so many years surviving, adapting to the chaos, that the stillness was foreign to her. But it was in this quiet space that she began to realize how much had changed. It wasn't just about the new clothes or the food she could now afford, it was the inner change, the quiet knowledge that she had options. She hadn't told Elon about this quiet revolution inside her, but she had started to dream again. She imagined going to school every day, raising her hand in class, becoming a scientist, and one day, changing the world in her own way. For the first time, she saw herself as someone who could contribute to society, not just as a survivor, but as someone capable of shaping her own future. It was a dream that seemed impossible not so long ago, but now it felt tangible, real. But as her thoughts wandered to those possibilities, Kelly couldn't help but wonder how much of her future had been shaped by Elon. Was this really her dream, or had he just opened a door that she was now walking through? And what about Susan? What would she do if she found out that Kelly had left? Kelly wasn't sure if she was ready to confront that part of her past, but she knew she had to, eventually. A few days later, Elon reached out to Kelly, offering to meet her at a local park to discuss her progress. She had become accustomed to his calls, but there was something different in his tone this time. There was a sense of urgency, something that made her sit up straighter when she picked up the phone. "I've arranged a meeting with some people," Elon explained, his voice steady but filled with resolve. "We're going to start taking legal action against Susan. You're not going to have to worry about her anymore." Kelly's heart raced. She hadn't expected it to move this quickly. But hearing Elon's confidence brought a sense of relief she hadn't anticipated. She had been waiting for someone to take the first step, someone to help her stand up to the woman who had kept her in chains, even if those chains were invisible to the world. "Are you sure about this?" Kelly asked, her voice trembling slightly. What if she comes after me?" Elon's response was immediate, unwavering. "You're not alone in this, Kelly. We're going to make sure she can't hurt you anymore. And if she tries, we'll be ready for her. I'll take care of it." The meeting was set for the following week. Kelly, though still nervous, found herself surprisingly calm as the day approached. She had been to court before, had witnessed people fight over petty things, but this was different. This time, it was her fight, and the person leading it was someone who had the power to change things. Elon wasn't just a figurehead in Silicon Valley, he was a man of action, and Kelly could see that. On the day of the meeting, Kelly was waiting at the park, sitting on a bench and looking out at the small lake that stretched ahead of her. The breeze had picked up, ruffling her hair, but she didn't mind. Her heart was pounding in her chest, and she felt the weight of the moment press against her. Elon arrived in his Tesla, the sleek silver vehicle pulling up beside her. He stepped out, his usual air of confidence making him stand taller than anyone else in the park. But when he saw Kelly sitting there, his expression softened, and he walked over to her with a purposeful stride. "Ready?" he asked, his voice steady, but Kelly could see the concern behind his eyes. Kelly looked up at him, feeling a sudden surge of strength she didn't know she had. "I'm ready." The legal team Elon had assembled was formidable, a group of sharp-minded professionals who wasted no time in drafting the paperwork and preparing the case against Susan. They had gathered evidence, talked to people who had seen Kelly's situation, and built a case that was impossible to ignore. For the first time in Kelly's life, she was on the right side of the law. It was the beginning of a new chapter for her, one where she was no longer a victim of circumstance, but a young woman determined to shape her own future. Elon had not just given her the tools, he had given her something far more valuable, the belief that she was worthy of a life outside the shadows of exploitation. But as Kelly looked at the legal papers, as she signed her name on the dotted line, she realized that this was the moment of liberation. It wasn't just about getting away from Susan, it was about taking control of her life, her future, and her destiny. And as she walked out of that meeting with Elon, the weight that had burdened her for so long seemed to lighten, as if a heavy cloud had finally lifted from her shoulders. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. The case against Susan took months to unfold, but with Elon's help, Kelly remained strong throughout the process. Each day, she focused more on her studies, more on her dreams, until one day, she found herself standing in front of a classroom, raising her hand to answer a question. She was no longer the girl in the red dress, begging on the streets. She was Kelly, a student, a future scientist, and above all, a survivor. Elon's belief in her, his insistence that she was worthy of a second chance, had made all the difference. And as Kelly looked forward to the next chapter of her life, she knew that, no matter what challenges lay ahead, she was ready. A future rewritten. It had been several months since Kelly had taken the first steps into her new life, and with each passing day, the changes were more evident. The small room she called home in the youth shelter had become a place of comfort, not just refuge. Kelly had transformed in ways that even she hadn't fully understood at first. Her days now revolved around studying, attending classes, and receiving mentorship that was slowly but surely starting to shape her into the person she had always dreamed of becoming. But there was still a nagging sense of disbelief within her, a feeling that the life she was living now couldn't possibly be hers. It felt too perfect, too unreal. It wasn't just the education, the tutors, or the freedom that she had been given, it was the transformation inside her. For the first time, she had learned to value herself. She wasn't just someone who existed in the margins, struggling to survive. She was someone with aspirations, with dreams of a future that she could claim for herself. The question of whether or not she deserved this life had been answered time and again by the people who had supported her, Elon Musk, the legal team, the shelter staff, and the mentors who had taken her under their wing. But none of it had been easy. Kelly had struggled to shake off the remnants of her old life, the fear, the need to constantly look over her shoulder, the anxiety of wondering when the next shoe would drop. The scars from her past, both physical and emotional, were still there, hidden beneath the surface. There were nights when she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if this life was a fleeting dream she wasn't ready to believe. And yet, every morning, she woke up and found that the world was still changing for her. Today was different. Today, Kelly had an interview. It was for an internship at a local research lab, something she had never thought possible, but something Elon had encouraged her to pursue from the start. He had offered his connections, his guidance, and most importantly, his belief that Kelly had the potential to make a difference. It was time for Kelly to step up to the plate and take her future into her own hands. The sun was still low in the sky as Kelly stood in front of the mirror in the small shelter room, adjusting the collar of her shirt. She had spent the last few days preparing for this moment, studying the lab's research, rehearsing her answers to potential questions, and making sure she presented herself as confident and capable. Despite all her preparations, her stomach was a ball of nerves. This wasn't just any interview, it was the opportunity she had been waiting for. It was her chance to prove to herself that everything Elon had promised her was possible. Taking a deep breath, Kelly squared her shoulders. She wasn't the same girl who had rattled a tin can on the street for scraps. She wasn't the girl who had cowered under Susan's manipulative gaze. She had learned that she was worthy of more than that. Today, she was going to show the world what she could do. The research lab was located in a quiet corner of the city, tucked away from the hustle and bustle that defined much of Austin's tech scene. The building itself was modest, not grand or flashy like the tech campuses that Elon had built, but there was an air of quiet prestige about it. Inside, the walls were lined with scientific journals, posters of groundbreaking experiments, and shelves filled with scientific equipment. The lab staff, a group of focused researchers, moved quickly between workstations, typing furiously on computers or analyzing data. There was a hum of energy in the air, a place where big ideas took shape. Kelly stood at the entrance, a nervous energy coursing through her veins. She had been here before, had walked through the halls as part of the shelter's program, but today felt different. Today, she was here as a candidate. A voice interrupted her thoughts. Kelly. The voice was warm and welcoming, with an unmistakable southern drawl. Kelly turned to find a tall man in a lab coat walking toward her, a friendly smile on his face. You must be Kelly. I'm Dr. Thomas King, and I'll be conducting your interview today. Welcome. Kelly returned the smile, extending her hand. It's great to meet you. Likewise, Dr. King said, shaking her hand firmly. Let's take a seat and chat. I've been looking over your resume, and I have to say, I'm impressed by your enthusiasm for science, especially given your background. But I want to hear from you. Why don't you tell me why you're interested in working with us? Kelly sat down, her hands still trembling slightly, but she forced herself to focus. She had come too far to let nerves derail her. Well, Dr. King, Kelly began, her voice steady despite the tremor of uncertainty deep within her, I've always been fascinated by the world around me. I've spent a lot of time thinking about how things work, why they work, and how we can improve them. I want to be a part of something bigger than myself, and I believe science can help me do that. I want to learn, to contribute, and to work with a team that's doing important work. That's why I'm here today. Dr. King nodded thoughtfully, jotting down a few notes on his clipboard. He looked up at her, his eyes focused, yet warm. That's a good answer, Kelly. It sounds like you've put a lot of thought into this. I'll be honest with you, this is a competitive field, and we get a lot of applicants, but I can see the drive in you. The passion. That's something we value here. Kelly felt a rush of gratitude, but she didn't let it show. Instead, she kept her posture straight, listening intently. We're going to start you on a small project, something to help you get your feet wet, so to speak. If all goes well, we'll offer you an official internship position. But I want to see how you handle the work, how you fit in with the team. Kelly's heart skipped a beat. She had been expecting a long, drawn-out process, but this was different. This was real. I won't let you down, she said, her voice steady now. I'm ready to work. As the interview progressed, Kelly felt a sense of relief wash over her. Dr. King's questions were thoughtful, his demeanor encouraging. He wasn't just evaluating her based on her qualifications, he was looking at her potential. He saw something in her that went beyond the surface. That was something she hadn't felt in a long time, the belief that someone saw her for who she could be, not for who she had been. By the time the interview came to an end, Kelly was no longer nervous. There was an undeniable sense of hope inside her, one she hadn't dared to believe in for so long. As she stood to leave, Dr. King extended his hand one more time. Welcome to the team, Kelly, he said with a smile. We're excited to have you. Kelly shook his hand, a smile breaking across her face. This was it. This was the turning point. The path to her future was now open, and she had made it there on her own, with no one's help but her own determination and Elon's unwavering belief in her. Later that evening, as Kelly walked back to the shelter, she felt lighter than she had in a long time. The world around her seemed a little brighter, a little more welcoming. For the first time, she didn't feel like an outsider looking in. She felt like she belonged. When she arrived at her room, she sat down at her desk, the paperwork for the internship fresh in her hands. She stared at it for a few moments, letting the weight of what had just happened settle in. This was her moment. Her chance to take control of her destiny and rewrite her story. She thought back to that first day she had met Elon, to the moment when he had promised to help her. At the time, she hadn't believed it. But now, as she looked at the internship offer in her hands, she understood. This was the opportunity she had been given, and it was up to her to make the most of it. And as she looked out the window at the city, the first real inkling of hope blossomed inside her. She had come a long way from the girl in the red dress, the one who had been invisible in the streets, to someone who was now part of something bigger, a future filled with promise, possibility, and the power to change the world. Kelly wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. And for the first time in her life, she knew that the best was yet to come.